we have our people online and all?
We have, please hold.
Everything is more than calendar stuff. You know, I went through stuff right
No.
now. It cost us a certain amount even 3 years ago. It's a third higher.
Wait. I have one.
And the little stuff is just crazy.
They were going to charge Tim for ice cream being late, but I guess you are on time. On time.
Heath Walker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Mojave County Building Advisory Code Board meeting. I would like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. May we have roll call, please?
Absolutely. Chairman Hamilton,
Here.
Vice Chair Prophet. Vice Chair Prophet, absent. Board Member McKee.
Here.
Board Member Azarmi.
Here.
Board Member Renner. Board Member Renner, absent. Board Member Ruge.
Here.
Board Member Walker.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes on January 11th, 2023. Is there any discussion on this, or has everybody had a chance to go through them? Any changes or?
So moved.
Is there a second?
A second?
There's been a motion and a second to approve the meetings from January 11th, 2023. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Heath Walker.
All opposed?
Is now exiting.
Bye, Keith. Do we still have a quorum if he exited?
Yes.
Thank you. The approval of the meeting minutes of 1/11/23 is passed. First item on the agenda is the discussion and possible action regarding geotechnical requirements for commercial and residential properties. This is continued from our meeting on January 11th, 2023. We do have somebody that'd like to speak on this. Renee Hagen, did I pronounce that correctly? Please.
My name is Renee Hagan, and I'm here today to support the enforcement. The enforcement of the soils
Renee.
testing on new construction.
Okay, excuse me a minute. Can you please state your name again with your address, please?
Renee Hagan, 2249 East Roberts Way, Fort Mojave.
Thank you.
I'm here today to support the enforcement of soils testing on all new construction. My house was built in 2018 by a local builder who's been in the area for 20 years. My house is coming apart at the seams. I cannot open and close my front door. The drywall is cracking all around. The stucco is cracking. I have separations within all the drywall with like 1.5 inches. My windows won't close properly. The floor is lifted off the baseboards from the floor is about 1.5 inches off the floor in some areas. If the builder was required to obtain a soils report, I wouldn't be here today. We had a soils test done, and half of the house is built on clay and half is built on sand. The half of the house that's on clay is heaving and the other half is sinking. The entire foundation needs to have helo piers installed around the entire foundation and a polymer product injected into the soil to keep it sinking further. I believe that the building official and the Director of Community Development Services, when they make recommendations, they should be recommendations to enforce a specific building code, they should be able to do so. This is what they're hired to do, to enforce the building codes and the Mojave County policies. To not let them do so is irresponsible, in my opinion. My goal here today is not to let this financial hardship happen to others. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any more paperwork. Is there anybody else that wanted to speak on this matter? Is there any discussion from the board on this matter?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, I know that, we have discussed this several times. I just want to review with the board my findings and my notes that I had in the past meetings and all that. I just summarized the whole thing of the process into 4 categories that we had. One is basically the exception that is, I believe, in the section 1803.2, that basically says the building official shall be permitted to waive the requirement of a geotech investigation where satisfactory data from the adjacent areas is available. Basically what it says is that, there are subdivisions that, homes are built and, there is no problem, never had any problem in the communities that they are. So on those individual lots, the building official has the authority to waive, the geotech. And I believe that that was agreed upon in the past in my discussions with Director Walsh and also with building official Gilbert. We already discussed on that. And that based on most of the builders, they know about the neighborhoods that, they're building on, and each of the area, they know that, there is a problem or there is no problem. And again, as I said, in this particular case, based on the history of the community, that they have several different, if there was any problems, they would be able to see that. So basically that's item number 1. Number 2, what we talked about is that, if the parcel is large enough or it is, to the point that they're not going to have sewer, the perk test, that they would be able to do that, that would basically provide the information that, as you know, it shows like the layers and, of the soil from almost like, normally they go down about 11 feet, 10 feet or so, and they categorize, the type of material. And if there is going to be a clay, that would be shown. So that one thing we talked about is that, that can be helping or validating the situation. If there is going to be any clay, it will show on that soil. So that's basically is as good as geotech for the purpose of protecting, the end user, owner, builder, or the general contractor, that wants to do that, as well as, the building official or the plan reviewer to be able to see that. And, I believe that was also reviewed in the past, and that was agreeable to Director Walsh and also to Gilbert. The other thing that we have is that one thing we have to understand about the geotech report, and some of us, I'm sure that Director Walsh also agrees with me. The geotech report that you normally get on any project, it is a template that comes from the soil engineer, and it's like a book that is like so thick, and only like 2 or 3 pages of that is directly applicable to the project that you have. And they do have some sort of a general information that on it, like for example, on every single one that you see, they talk about over X, that you have to over X, and sometimes, there is no need because the subdivision is already graded and all that. So there is absolutely no need to be over X on that. So that's something that, in my opinion, and again, I know there are some, according to the report that we have from Gilbert in 2016, I believe on Public Works was able to provide information on some of the subdivisions in terms of the geotech that is available, or even, if builders, they were able to get their hands on a subdivision that had a geotech, and that they provided that to, Gilbert's office, that's available. And again, If it is an overkill, what they have to do is to approach a soil engineer, and soil engineer can review and then provide a letter that, you know, instead of being like 24 inches wide or over X or whatever, there is no requirement or there is no need for that. And I think that should be acceptable to the building official and also to, the building department in general. Now, if it is going to be let's say that, there is a parcel of land that it is in middle of nowhere, and they're deciding not to do a septic tank, and they want to have a holding tank, let's say 20 acre someplace in Mojave County, that there is no example around and there is no practice available, I can see that that would be the application. Otherwise, as I said, if they go through these 4 categories, I think that would save the situation that, the young lady, just addressed that. Because again, it is, as a general contractor, it is our position, our job to, do our due diligence and to be able to, make sure that, what we have there. And again, it is not a compaction situation. Of course, we have like, the grading. Let's say that some property brought some fill. Well, based on the Mojave County ordinance that we have, if it is more than 50 cubic yard, they need to have a grading permit. So that would also, with the grading permit, they have to bring in, the compaction test and soil report in terms of the compaction portion of it and all that. So I just want to make sure that I review these items with the board and make sure that, we are in agreement with Director Walsh and also, Gilbert. Are we in agreement with this?
Director Walsh, do you have, or Mr. Walsh?
Chairman Hamilton, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate Commission. We just had a planning and zoning commission today, so I apologize for calling anybody commissioners. Board member Azarmi's explanation there and kind of recap of what we've gone through. I've met with chief building officials maybe and gone through all of these items as well, and I believe he has basically a summary of what he's gone through as well, and from what we've spoke, I believe they line up pretty close. But if I may, I'll allow, if it pleases the chair, if we could have Mr. Smaby go through his presentation on this as well.
Please.
Chairman Hamilton, board members. Basically, I have a memo that was issued out to you guys, but what we found out, I did a survey of most other jurisdictions, and it kind of came back to how we originally had our policy, that we would actually use a table in the IBC, and that's also in your packet behind my memo. This is table 1806.2 of the International Building Code, and it basically is it's a section in the code that allows for presumptive load-bearing values. This is something like, as I said, their lowest default value for clay, sandy clay, and silt is 1,500. And then the building code also, in the foundation section of the code, gives a specific width and height requirement for footings of the foundation based on these values. So this was our policy before. We utilized this table. Again, when we took over the soils reports from the Public Works Department in 2016, it was kind of it wasn't known of which subdivisions had the soils reports, which didn't. I have a full listing of them now. There's probably 35 for the Fort Mojave area of different subdivisions. So again, we did find the soils reports, but if it's not a subdivision, then basically we revert back to this presumptive soil bearing pressure values that's in the code. What else? And then again in the clauses, if the soils are questionable, if we have any question of that, I as the building official can require a soils test. But typically it hasn't been needed in some of the areas. I do agree with Mr. Arzami that some of the subdivisions and a lot of the soils reports are over X. In some cases, they don't need to be. It's a recommendation for the soils or for the developer. And again, these are really for subdivisions of 6 lots or more. So when we start getting into individual lots, we utilize this table. And that's current policy, and that's the continuing policy I want to keep.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that, are we in agreement on what I just stated, right?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just, and again, this is more of just a clarification of Mr. Arzami said. He and I are both general contractors. We've been licensed since 93, I think, or 94. I've been here for quite a few years. As general contractors, we pretty much know the areas that are bad. I mean, we could name them by subdivision and by street and almost by lot number where we have expansive soils and potential problem soils. So I'm in agreement with Mr. Arzami and apparently you as well that this blanket requirement of the existing soils engineers and all reports, they're just a one-size-fits-all. They are recommendations. They add expenses. I just did 8 houses over on Twins that has an old soils report, which cost me an additional $112,000, which I'm going to end up passing that on to our what we call our customers and the end users. So in adding these costs really push people out of sometimes out of a qualification for a loan and push them into mobile homes because these particular houses are lower end models. So I'm in agreement that we kind of need to take this on an individual basis. I think it's a great idea. Mr. Arzami talked about the perk test, where they're required. Absolutely. I mean, that gives us a soils test and gives us any idea of what's going on below. So I'm in agreement with exercising that exception. I have it written as 1803.2, if I remember, is exercising that exception.
So Chairman Hamilton, if I may, just to offer a little bit of clarification as well, too, and going back with the history of it, as Gilbert mentioned previously, we follow the guidance of the building code that here's the presumptive soil bearing pressures, and if we didn't have an existing soils report, then we would follow those bearing pressures. Where we do have soils reports, and as was mentioned, where we have these subdivisions with soils reports, we would defer to those just because that is, more specific to that area. I do agree that many times you'll see the same recommendations throughout. My understanding, though, is that there is some ability to negotiate with those geotechs and say, okay, is this portion really required? Is this just your template that's being placed throughout, or is this really what's needed in these areas? And just to fall back on what the speaker had mentioned, we want to help avoid those as well. And you all on this board are outstanding contractors, and we're very blessed to have you guys here to help in this. Unfortunately, you guys don't build all the houses throughout Mojave County, and there are others that don't build to the same standard. So those are the ones that we do have some concerns about, and want to make sure that if we see those kinds of issues out there, that we do have that ability to say, hey, we're seeing some clays in this area. We want to make sure that gets addressed before we get to the point of somebody having to deal with a cracking foundation or sheetrock that's splitting and those types of things. So just to clarify and wrap it all together, yes, we'll continue to follow the building code or the ICC standards in that those are the presumptive soil bearing pressures. Where we do have the geotech reports, we would defer to those on the basically findings of what they have in those recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir.
I think that's part of the problem we're discussing here is these are, I've read hundreds of them. I'm not an engineer, and I've read hundreds of them. You can almost take one page from one and put into another. So these are blanket template, almost like verbatim requirements that are very expensive, and I'm being told by these reports, and obviously by the county, that I have to over X in these areas, and they give all these recommendations in areas that I know that there are no, I mean, I have dug down, there are no expansive soils, there's sandy loam, there's no opportunity for expansive soils, and this particular area is in question. It was with a soils report that was done in '78 by an engineer who is no longer alive. I knew Ray Statler. I don't know if you guys knew Ray Statler. So I understand that the county's trying to limit, liability on itself, but what are we really trying to prevent? Because I don't believe there's a case that anybody has ever come back on the county and blamed the county for anything underneath. And second, it's taking a lot out of of responsible contracting and putting it, on a regulation standard where they get overbearing. And again, here I've got to pass $112,000 on, in my opinion, it was a waste of money, and it pushed our houses out of a market bracket into another one.
Chairman Hamilton, if I may, first of all, I believe Ray's still with us, so I don't.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I heard otherwise. Sorry,
Yeah,
Ray.
no,
I know,
he's
super
still-
guy. Okay.
To address the concerns, and really this is where we run into issues. Unfortunately, if we have a geotech report that's sealed by a geotechnical engineer with recommendations in their field of expertise, it's very hard for the county to override that, to say, oh, that expert doesn't know as much as the chief building official. So in overriding that or in dismissing what comes with those geotech reports, that's where the liability would then fall on the county, because we're saying, disregard what that expert says, we're going to tell you what it is. So then now if anything were to occur on that lot, like you say, 99 times out of 100, nothing will. But on that one that does, then it comes back, well, the chief building official said that I didn't need to worry, especially when there's a geotech saying you need to do these things, and the chief building official says, oh, no, it's okay, don't worry about it. They're going after that chief building official.
Mr. Chairman, I think, Director Walsh, we're talking both sides, this side and that side, we're talking about the same thing. Because one element of that is that, yes, you have a signed and sealed geotech report by a soil engineer. And let's say that, the builder or the owner builder is having difficulty with, the items that they have in there, meaning like, for example, over X and, why they're footing and all that. By hiring a new soil engineer that is going to review that geotech and then provide, basically a validation that, yes, it is going to work. And again, that is something that happened to us. And, the geotech report that I did was 20 spots in our subdivision by Western Technology. Again, it was one of those booklets that I told you about. And obviously, working in that field and working in construction, I knew that it was major overkill. And when you have the subdivision, there is no need for over X, existing pads and all. So with that, based on the agreement we had, we got Sunbelt to review the soil report and the geotech report. And he basically validated our argument that there was no need for that. So I believe that should be unacceptable.
Absolutely.
So I think you're talking about the same thing. So
Yes.
I just want to make sure that, these elements that I just reviewed would be also implemented as a policy for the building department, because we are basically agreeing to the same thing. But again, the only thing is that we are not documenting it as acceptable method for this, or perk test. Again, you mentioned about like the situation that happened to our young lady there. We have a lot of subdivisions right now in Fort Mojave Valley that I'm aware of, and they can pull a permit and get going, and we know that there is a clay there. And again, and those are the pockets that they exist. And again, that's an unfortunate thing that the builder of the record most probably did not do the due diligence on that. I mean, that's basically the fact. But here, what I'm saying is that, if the property is large enough that is going to accept the PERC test, the PERC test that we want to have, and again, that is going to be turned in with the application to the building department. The PERC test, normally you have your septic permit included when you're applying for a permit. And again, that should be, a red flag that, there is at 2 feet down, you have like 3 feet of clay.
Yeah.
So for that reason, then I can see that, definitely we need to address that by a soil engineer making the recommendation, or the evidence of clay shall be removed. Which, we have that in Mojave Valley area. We have El Rio subdivision. We have King Street and all that there is a 3 feet layer of the clay. So it takes about $35,000 or so per lot to be able to get rid of the clay, replace it with, a compactable material, but that is going to exceed the 50 cubic yard that, you have, and definitely a soil engineer would be involved to be able to validate the compaction test of every layer of the, 12-inch and testing and all that. So that's basically, I think we are both sides of the table. We are saying the same thing. The only request that I have, Mr. Chairman, is that we include this in the body of the, ordinance that we have. So, we would be able to go back to, because right now, the way that we have it, it's basically geotech. And, it doesn't specify this stipulation that the building official has the authority to make the change, which is part of the code. And then number 2 is the PERC test that, can be used for that purpose. That's my request.
And we'll hold that for a possible motion. Mrs. Hagan, I have a question or two for you, if that's okay. If you can come up to the podium, please. Yes, ma'am. Just a couple of questions to clarify for me, if that's okay. Was your house built in a subdivision?
Yes.
It was with the geotech report? Do you know offhand?
I have not been able to find the geotech report. I've requested it, but I guess Public Works was doing it, so maybe I didn't request from the right department. But I've not been able to find it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
May I bring up?
If I may
Are you
ask-
talking about the PERC test? Like for my property, my house is built up here, and there's a lower level here, and that's where the septic tank is. So they did do a test down there for the septic tank, but my house is up here. So this dirt down here doesn't relate to this dirt up here. They're like two separate.
May I ask what subdivision you live in?
Sunset Ranches.
Exactly. I'm familiar with the community of Sunset Ranchers. There was a builder, Ramsey, that was involved in that project, and they had, that was recognized that area had clay. So definitely, your builder either was a rookie builder in this area that, did, or, overlooked it. But again, that would be something that, that's why you have the license bonded and insured. And you're not the only one. I've seen a lot of different projects that happen. As a matter of fact, I was, as an expert, working with an attorney that had a similar situation, that somebody, instead of correcting the soil problem with the clay, decided that, if he brings in 10 additional cubic yard of concrete and makes that footing, heavier and all that, it is going to help, which actually does not help. Actually, it's going to hurt. So what I'm saying is that, I agree with you 100% about the Sunset Ranchers. Everybody knows. I'm sure that, the building official knows about it.
I know about a whole bunch of homes.
Yeah.
Actually found out about them. And I was told by a builder about the area after we bought the home.
Right.
And then I know several builders, and it's known.
And again, what we are stating has nothing to do with the areas that there is evidence of clay. We talked about that, you know, those are areas that, you know, needs to be addressed one way or another. One can be done in a form of a soil engineer with a geotech to come up with, you know, some solution for that. Post-tension slab is one option, and there are a whole bunch of other things, or get rid of the clay, which is expensive and, you know, contracting in the when it is too wet or if it's too dry, the movement happens. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I guess, Mr. Walsh, the reason I was asking these questions is this was in a subdivision. Whatever action we take, what are we going to be able to do to protect the homeowners, whether they're in a subdivision or not? I guess is where we're at on this. This is why this has come to our attention.
Thank you, Chairman. Right now, basically with any new subdivisions, a geotech report is done. So any new subdivisions, we will be able to see what those soil conditions are. Some of the older subdivisions that were platted prior to requiring a geotech report, or if they're older subdivisions and we don't have those on file, those subdivisions would basically follow as we discussed with the looking at the soils, if there is a perk test available, being able to use that perk test to classify the soils, and then based on that classification, you utilize the table in the IBC to be able to determine what that soil bearing pressure should be.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just for clarification, will a geotech report exist on subdivision X? The one that I just did, there was overkill over X. I mean, it was just completely overdone. In a situation as that, and I just want to clarify, we could take it on a case-by-case basis, and I could come to you with another report from a different geotech engineer that says, hey, this is overkill, this is the new recommendation.
Yes, we would accept a new
that's
geotech
part of the
report
exception of what
Mr.
the
Chairman?
official.
It is my understanding that, you know, if you're having like area, like a subdivision, and let's say that you have 5 or 10 lots in that subdivision, if you would get your soil engineer to provide a letter, that would be basically, I believe that, you know, it's going to be good enough for the number of properties that you have. So you don't have to do individual ones, because basically the soil consistency is not like it's going to be on one lot and the next door is going to be totally different.
It's a good point, yes.
Yeah, we would.
That's very clear. I think that's great. I think that's thank you.
And if I may, just to go back to the discussion a second ago, with basically encapsulating it within code. Currently, code allows for this default table, these default soil bearing pressures, and they have a list, if I can borrow yours, Gilbert. Okay, it should be in your packet, but basically it goes through the class of materials, whether it be bedrock, sedimentary, sandy gravel and gravel, sand, silty sand, and all the way down to clay, sandy clay, and that. As long as we can get some sort of classification from the perk test to be able to classify in here, we would utilize that in order to come up with that bearing pressure. So in a sense, what you're proposing is already adopted within our code. As long as we have something that we can fall back on saying this is the type of soil there, we would then be able to use this table to come up with that soil bearing pressure.
Thank you. So the action before us today on item number 1 is to either, our possible action on this item on the geotech report to either, I believe, is to keep it the way it is with a couple of recommendations or change it. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman. It can, so currently right now, I believe what's being discussed, as was mentioned, I think we're all saying the same thing. I believe what we have in place would address what's being proposed. We had a hiccup, as was mentioned, and hiccup isn't the right word. It was a real pain for a lot of people, so I don't want to downplay that at all. And in going through that and going back and looking, I believe we've corrected that issue. And going forward, I believe we're all on the same page that if there's an existing geotech, we would defer to that. If that geotech appears to be too onerous, the contractor could get a second geotech that would clarify the initial or change those recommendations, and the county would honor that new geotech report. In the absence of a geotech report, a perk test that classifies those soils would be used to be able to use the default, the presumptive soil-bearing pressures that are included in the code. And in areas where it's known or where the soil is questionable, then we would still pursue a geotech to identify those soils.
Thank you.
Does this require a motion, or are we, if so or not?
I believe we're going to need a motion to either take no action on this matter on the geotech or to take it to further action, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, I think that what we need to do is to have a motion, and again, because we want to make sure that the ordinance is going to disclose these stipulations that we just talked about as some condition, that would basically satisfy, what we just discussed, and we are in agreement.
That is correct. We would need a motion on that, but I think some of the recommendations that you were talking about on that would be a policy change with the building department, if I'm not mistaken. It's not anything that would go with the code book.
If
Code,
I don't think
or am I
so.
wrong?
I think it's not a policy change. It is basically one thing that is being implemented already and is being practiced.
And so if I'm understanding right, it's basically just a matter of clarifying what's currently being implemented, basically including that in code. Is that what's being, and definitely we can take those recommendations, amend the code and bring it back to the advisory board to review.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, or I can make a motion, either way you want.
So
We're here for.
yeah, if you like, basically if we can have those, I think it ends up cleaner if we can get those recommendations, we can update the code and then bring it back, and then we can move forward. And then that way we can all see the same thing and know what we're approving.
Mr. Chairman, just, we know that on the land use ordinance, we are not going, in the future, we're not going to have any properties that are going to be less than 1 acre that are going to be on sewer. They have to be on sewer. They cannot be on septic tank. So any property that is 1 acre or larger, they can have septic tank as long as the sewer is not available. So that resolves that problem of the subdivisions that are going to be larger. Subdivisions that are going to be smaller and are existing, they rely back on the geotech, number one. And then what we are talking about is that, if owner builder or builder sees that, the situation, like, what, Doug was mentioning, that, the geotech report was overkill, then, there is an opportunity for, the owner builder or the builder to be able to bring in another soil engineer to be able to validate the design or, validate, the new format and sign and seal and provide that to the county. If it is going to be something that is not available, the history also would be available to, all that. So that's another option that we have on it. So, the building official can really go back to the exception that we talked about on page 429 of the code, and then he can make that decision. If there is something that is going to be completely out of that, and that we don't have any history, and there is no evidence of any other building around or anything like that, that building official can go back to, then definitely they have to do the geotech. Just want to make sure that we have.
Chairman Hamilton and board members, keep in mind that this presumptive table is a default. It is the lowest standard, so if you couldn't provide me with any documentation of different types of soil configuration, we would require you to use the lowest default. So keep that in mind, as you would have the most restrictive foundation if you couldn't provide that. So providing a perk test or something with a different soil would actually get you a lesser foundation if you could show that. But right now, we're under the most restrictive, besides a geotechnical report.
Again, Mr. Chairman, right now, the soil bearing that we basically, everybody follows is basically the code requirement, the minimum code requirement that we have. And that, in general, if you calculate that, it is basically for 1,500 pound per square feet. Nobody, goes into finding like, if it is 3,000 PSF or it is, 1,000 PSF in general. Unless, as I said, the evidence is going to show that it is sugar sand and it is like, really, really a poor situation, then that table is going to come to help. So I think that, by what we are talking about, it is covering all possibilities, in my opinion. And again, it's a clarification of understanding that, both sides, we have on this thing, meaning like, the end users as well as the building official. Thank you.
So with that said, do we have a motion or is there any more discussion
Mr. Chairman,
on
I
this?
believe Director Walsh suggested that to take this back and be able to do a nice, complete.
Yep, absolutely. So
out.
if it pleases the board, basically I would recommend a motion to direct staff to update the ordinance for review to include the items that Mr. Azarmi has presented.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask Director Walsh, if the draft that you prepare, you share with the Code Advisory Board, so if we have any comment, we would be able to, instead of, waiting until the next meeting, if you could share, or Gilbert can share that draft with us, we can make our comment and then we can take it from there. Not as a board, but as an individual.
Yes, and yeah, and that's where I was going. We can definitely get it out to the board to review prior to the meeting. Any discussion would have to occur at the meeting, but
Almost
definitely any comments that the board members might have, they could present those to Mr. Smaby, and we could basically have those able to be addressed prior to the meeting so that it can be discussed and have those options available.
Mr. Chairman, if Gilbert send it to BCC it to us, we are not going to reply back to all. So we would be able to respect that policy.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. I need a motion.
Well, no, I mean, the motion is to table until, I make a motion to table this item until Gilbert would be able to come up with the draft and present it to us in the next meeting.
Thank you.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to send this back to Development Services to look at this further and to evaluate it with recommendations from the board. All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Number 2 item, it's up for discussion, the possible action regarding energy code requirements for commercial projects. This is also continued from our January 11th meeting, 2023. Mr. Walsh? Mr. Stavey?
Is there any call to the public? Public hearing?
I don't have any paperwork for a call to the public on this at this time.
Chairman Hamilton and board members, this is a discussion on the energy code requirements for commercial projects. I'm just going to read the Energy Code Conservation Code is the IECC. It was established back in, I believe, 2006. We've always had a version of this utilized for commercial projects. And it basically sets the minimum efficiency requirements for new and renovated buildings, assures reductions in energy use and emissions over the life of the building. Energy codes ensure the building's energy use is included as a fundamental part of the design and construction process, making it early investment in energy efficiency and pays dividends to the owners and occupants for the years in the future of that structure. The energy codes are subject to building codes, which establish baseline requirements that govern the building construction. Code buildings are more comfortable, more cost-effective to operate, ensuring energy, economic, and environmental benefits. And basically, they, contribute to conservation of our natural resources. let's see, the code provides 3 methods or paths to obtain energy compliance. These methods include a prescriptive path, a performance path, and an energy cost saving evaluation path. Most commercial designers prefer the performance method, utilizing a performance program or a program provided by the United States Department of Energy called ComCheck. These performance programs are software developed specifically for demonstrating compliance with the energy codes. The program allows the designer to input construction materials and methods and then calculates these inputs to reflect compliance or non-compliance with the IECC or the energy code. Many designers also prefer the performance method over prescriptive method, and as we currently use the prescriptive method for residential housing construction. So this performance method, because they basically like it for or commercial because they can choose different materials and methods to comply with the code and not have to specifically itemize out the prescriptive methods. So there's a give and take with the performance method system. And an example would be is in residential construction, we're seeing a lot of increase of spray foam insulation for ceiling insulation and conditioned space, basically. By having the energy code for residential as a prescriptive method, that type of material is not recognized as a prescriptive performance or prescriptive compliance method. So in the residential code itself, they do have performance method that they could utilize. And so an example was by using the spray foam and by using the performance method for, say, residential construction and spray foam, the designer can reduce the R value of the required R38 prescriptive requirement down to an R20 based on the overall performance of the rest of the structure. So they're allowed to, reduce energy requirements on one thing if they address it in another area. And that's what's really important for the commercial portion, because residential is pretty easy to meet prescriptive requirements. You have your standard insulation, your R38, your R19. In commercial, you have a lot more obstacles to go around to try to meet a performance of the building itself. So a lot of times, as I said, most of the designers use that performance method and know it pretty well. Again, the other 2 methods, the cost savings method and the prescriptive method, are cumbersome and difficult in the commercial code. I think I emailed all of you a link to the energy code. I'm not sure if you read through it. It's pretty extensive.
Okay.
Again, the designers like the performance programs that they can plug in the components of their structure and come out with a compliance or non-compliance. They can play around with it, and if it comes out that it's not compliant, they can do some other items in order to meet the energy requirements.
Chairman, I believe this item was tabled from the last meeting to allow for one of the speakers on it to bring back some concerns that they had. And I don't believe that speaker is here today.
That is correct, and the staff still recommends no action on this matter.
That's correct.
Mr.
So
Chairman.
it is on our agenda, so we do have to address it.
Right. Mr. Chairman, again, as Director Walsh stated, we had somebody who objected to this, and I believe this board provided ample opportunity for the person that was objecting to it to provide documents contrary to what Gilbert has recommended or staff recommended. And, I assume that, there was none available, so he's not here. So with that, I make a motion for no action on this item.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we take no action on the energy code requirements for commercial projects. That was continued from January 11, 2023. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the discussion and possible action regarding exemption shipping containers.
I guess Keith fell off the chair.
Keith dropped his coffee. With no utilities used for storage purposes, only from required permits. Would the board like to address this, or Gilbert, would you like to start off on this? We don't have any discussion on, or any call to the public on this yet?
I believe that we already have that in our land use ordinance, that, if there is any electrical, plumbing, or mechanical, that would require permit. If it is under 300 square feet, that should be, just if somebody wants a container and place it somewhere, there should be, no problem, because that becomes accessory building, right? So,
Hamilton and,
so what is,
This amendment is so that the larger trailers are 320 square feet, and this simply is just going to include those in with the rest of it. Is that my understanding?
correct,
So,
yeah. The smaller containers are
sense.
exempt, they're under the 300 square foot rule, and the larger ones are 320 square feet. Staff feels that the containers are built the same way, the only difference is the size. They still would require permits if they had any utilities hooked to them, so either container would. And just to clarify too, the 300 square foot structures, if they had utilities hooked to them, would require permits also.
exactly.
So staff recommends that we make an exemption included with our 120 of conventional construction and include containers, the 20-footers and 40-footers to be exempt from building permits.
If there's no other discussion from board members, I'd make a motion now that we approve this amendment.
I second that.
It's been moved and seconded that the action we take regarding this exemption
Is to approve their amendment.
is to approve their minimum. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda, item number 4, is the next meeting tentatively scheduled for 7/12/2023. Is there a conflict with that with anybody?
I will not be in the country for that.
You have to fly back.
Or invite us over.
That's good with me.
You're okay.
Seeing none, I guess we can schedule the next meeting for 7/12/2023.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
May I bring up an item for discussion with the building department to be either discussed today and decided upon, or reviewed and discussed at the next meeting? It's the item regarding special inspections for the Simpson Strong Walls. And that's obviously have a personal matter in that the majority of the buildings that I build with the RV garages have the 16-foot sidewalls. And so this section of the building is engineered. And we utilize the Simpson Strong Walls, the 16-foot. Those come with a template. They tell you exactly where to put the bolts. They also come with the bolts. If you buy them from Simpson, they have the bolt set, tell you to the exact depth that they need to be embedded. So I think it's kind of redundant, even though I read the ICC report that Gilbert, thank you for sending that recommended a special inspection. But if an engineer has already engineered it, they've specified to use that specific template, it's already been engineered by Simpson. I think it's redundant, a waste of money and a waste of time to have a special inspection come approve something that's already been approved.
Mr. Chairman.
Board Member McGee.
Yes.
I apologize, and I hate to cut you off on this.
No problem.
But this has to be an agenda item.
Okay, no problem.
If we
I
bring that
understand.
up. So it would be great if we could get that on the next agenda. We just can't discuss it
Okay, no
today
problem.
on this.
Can we make a motion to get that on the agenda, or?
Absolutely.
How do you do it? Could I
Absolutely.
make a
We're
motion,
usually,
to put this on the next agenda if possible?
And we can do that without a motion. We'll just
Yeah, we can
direct
do
it.
that. Yeah,
We'll-
that's
we'll put it
without a
on there.
motion.
Without the
fair enough.
motion, yeah.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the adjournment.
The what?
Adjournment. Oh. I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn our April Mojave County Advisory Code Board meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Oppose aye?
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.